Week 3 of the NFL season is officially here. So in today's video, let's go ahead and do our Week 3 predictions. So as I mentioned, we are going to be doing our Week 3 predictions. My current record thus far through 2 weeks is 18-14. We had a really bad Week 2, but a very good Week 1. So hopefully my Week 3 predictions are a bit more accurate than last week. We are going to begin with tonight's Thursday Night Football game, and we will be ending off with the Monday Night Football game, but let's hop into it. Starting off with our Thursday Night Football game between the New York Jets and the New England Patriots. This is going to be a very fun game in which you see two really good defenses kind of duking it out right now. When I'm making this video, the Jets haven't really looked that great offensively. There's definitely been a couple really good moments, such as the Breece Hall touchdown. When he caught the ball, it was a beautiful catch, and a couple drives with Aaron Rodgers, but it hasn't really looked all that consistent. And the same thing can sort of be said about the Patriots. Their offense has had some good moments. It has been able to run the ball fairly well, but in this matchup against the Jets defense, that's going to be very difficult. So I expect this one to be a bit of a low-scoring game in which both teams kind of have to figure out each other's defense, and it really comes down to me of which team can put together more drives that end up with points. And because I think this Patriots offense is going to not be able to do that, and I think Aaron Rodgers will be able to do so, I'm going to give the Jets the slight victory here. I'm going to give the Jets a 20-17 victory over the New England Patriots. But then we're fast forwarding to Sunday with our noon game, starting off with the Cleveland Browns versus the New York Giants. Last week, the Giants offense looked better against Washington, but that is arguably maybe the worst defense in the NFL. And now they're going up against one of the league's best defenses in the NFL. And because of that, I really do think this Giants offense is really going to struggle. But fortunately for them, this Browns team doesn't have a great offense either. So for me, it's going to come down to which quarterback is going to play better between Daniel Jones and Deshaun Watson, two of the league's worst quarterbacks. And I'm going to give the slight edge here to Deshaun Watson for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I just think that he's a better quarterback that is safer with the football. So I don't think he's going to cost his team turnovers or, easy possessions for the opposing offense. And I also think that this is a Browns defense that is so much better than the Giants. I know the Giants have a good defensive line and have a couple good pieces, but the Browns defense is maybe top 5. So because of that, I am going to give the slight edge here to the Cleveland Browns. I have the final score being 23 Cleveland to 9 with the New York Giants. Then we have another noon game between the New Orleans Saints and the Philadelphia Eagles. The New Orleans Saints are coming off 2 back-to-back impressive victories, one against the rivals of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, whereas the Philadelphia Eagles are coming off a loss on Monday to the Atlanta Falcons, a game in which they probably should have won, but a couple coaching decisions did not go their way, so they lost the game. And when I look at this matchup, I really look at one key concept that New Orleans was able to do against Dallas that I think Philadelphia might struggle against, which is going to be stopping the run game. New Orleans has been able to dominate both Carolina and Dallas in the run game, and Philadelphia does not have a very good run defense. The Packers were able to run on them specifically in the second half, and then Atlanta was also able to get a plenty of running plays themselves. I think they had over 120 rushing yards. So in a game against New Orleans where that interior offensive line is really stout and can really move those defensive tackles, I do think New Orleans will be able to run the football. And because they can run the football, I think things like play action, RPOs, and all those sort of things are really going to hurt this Philadelphia defense. With that said, Philadelphia's offense will be able to put up numbers. It's just going to be, in my opinion, a race to see who can get more points. And because this Saints offense has looked freaking awesome, I'm going to give the slight edge here to the Saints. I would say that this is a bit of a surprise pick, but at this point, they've played so well that I don't think it really is. I do think the final score will be close. I have the Saints winning 34 to Philadelphia's 27. Then we have a very fun game between CJ Stroud and the Texans going up against Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings. Thus far, the Minnesota Vikings have looked very impressive. Obviously, that week 1 win was awesome, and then their week 2 win against the 49ers was even better. But now they're heading into a matchup against a Houston Texans team that has been very impressive thus far. I wouldn't say they've looked necessarily dominant, but they beat a really good Bears team that has a great defense, and they were able to go toe-to-toe with the Indianapolis Colts, where that was a bit of a shootout. Now they're heading into a Minnesota matchup where Minnesota's defense is going to give issues for CJ Stroud, but ultimately speaking, I look at the talent gap here and just think that Houston has a little bit too much talent for Minnesota Minnesota to face up against. I do believe it's going to be a very close game in which maybe at some point Houston has to come from behind to win the game. Obviously, Brian Flores' defense is a really solid unit that his scheme is just ridiculous, as Brock Purdy said. So because of that, I think that could definitely give issues for CJ Stroud in that Texans offense. But ultimately speaking, I got a little bit more faith in CJ Stroud in that offense over some guy like Sam Darnold, who has looked good, but obviously CJ Stroud is that guy. So because of that, I'm going to go with CJ Stroud and the Texans to win with a final score of 26-21. Then we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up against the Denver Broncos. Denver's offense has been basically non-existent. Bo Nix hasn't been able to throw the ball down the field. He's had a couple turnovers and has looked very bad thus far. And even though Denver's defense is going to be able to keep them in some of these games while their offense figures it out, this is going to be a really tall task for them to overcome. Tampa Bay obviously has had two very impressive wins. They've looked like one of the best teams in the NFC, and they're probably a top 10 team right now in the NFL. Baker Mayfield is playing like a top 5 quarterback this year so far, so it's really hard for me to predict Denver over Tampa Bay. The only way that Tampa Bay could lose this game and Denver can win is if for some reason Bo Nix just finally wakes up and starts playing good. But because I don't think that's going to happen thus far through 2 weeks, it hasn't looked that way, so I'm going to go with Tampa Bay to win 24-13. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans versus the Green Bay Packers. Will Levis is going to be the starter moving forward. That's not really much of a surprise here. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans versus the Green Bay Packers. Malik Willis is going to be the starter for the Green Bay Packers yet again. And because of that, I obviously have a lot of different issues with this team rather than if Jordan Love was playing. Obviously, Jordan Love is by far the better quarterback and Malik Willis isn't that good, but he looked good last week, so I do think we have to give him somewhat of the benefit of the doubt here. With that said, Tennessee has had 2 really bad losses in which Will Levis has made some really bad mistakes. And for me, it's just going to be a matter of time until he can get those mistakes out of him. They are going up against a very good and talented Packers team that has been able to force some turnovers, so if Tennessee is to turn the ball over a crap ton, they're probably going to lose this game. But because there's a ton of pressure on Will Levis to perform at a higher level and not turn the ball over so much, I do think that he's going to come out there and play a lot more of a smart game. And because he's going to play that smart game, and because I believe in that Titans defense to startle a quarterback like Malik Willis, I'm going to give Tennessee the victory here in what should be a very fun matchup. I'm going to give the final score Tennessee 24, Green Bay 18. Then we have the Colts versus the Bears, 2 very young quarterbacks that have struggled mightily thus far through the season. And there have been 2 iterations of the Colts. You have the week 1 Colts where they were able to go toe-to-toe with the Houston Texans, and then there was the week 2 Colts where they put up 10 points against the Packers and Malik Willis. And so you're really kind of picking straws of, are they going to be the week 1 Colts where they looked really good, or are they going to have another blunder like they did in week 2? This is an incredible Bears defense, but this is also a Bears team that hasn't had the offense that I think we all expected them to have. You can blame Caleb or you can blame the offensive line. I think there's a lot of blame to throw around here. So because of that, I'm a little bit more tempted to go with the team that I've seen more from this year in Indianapolis over a team like Chicago. I do believe that Chicago will be able to force some turnovers, get pressure on Anthony, and make things a little bit hard for him. But unless Caleb Williams goes out there and plays really well, I don't really see how Chicago can beat that offense that Shane Steichen has built. So because of that, give me Indianapolis with a final score of 21-20. Moving on to an AFC matchup between the LA Chargers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've been getting a little bit of some criticism on my opinions of the Steelers, but I am going to remain steadfast in my opinions. I don't think Pittsburgh is a top 10 team. Until that offense can show me that they can consistently move the ball down the field and actually put up points, I don't think they're that great of a team. With that said, their defense is very legit. It might be a top 5 defense. TJ Watt has looked fantastic. He might be my current defensive player of the year, but they really haven't faced anyone quite yet. They went up against a bad team in week 1 and a bad team in week 2. Week 1, you beat the Atlanta Falcons with a 40-year-old quarterback who's coming off a torn Achilles. And week 2, you go up against maybe the worst starting quarterback in the NFL in Bo Nix. Yet despite that, those games were awfully close and the opposing teams had a chance to win both those games. But now you're going up against an LA Chargers team that arguably could be a top 10 team in the NFL. They've shown they can play some good defense while also showing that they can effectively move the ball offensively. So in this matchup, I think this is a great opportunity for both of these teams to prove that they are legitimate teams. But with that said, I believe much more in Jim Harbaugh and that Chargers offense because of Justin Herbert, because of what I've seen in the run game, over a team like Pittsburgh that hasn't been able to make much points and score touchdowns. So because of that, I do believe it's going to be a more defensive battle game that's going to come down to which team can ultimately get to 21st, and I think LA is going to be the team. So with that said, I think the final score will be LA 20 and Pittsburgh 20. 12. Now, before any Pittsburgh fans call me a Pittsburgh hater, I'm not a hater. I'm just simply telling the truth. I think their offense is very lackluster, and in an offensive-driven league, you have to put up points, and I don't think they can do that unless somebody like Russell Wilson or Justin Fields plays better. But now we enter into our 3 o'clock window. We are going to begin with the Seattle Seahawks versus the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, Miami does not have Tua. They're going to be rocking with Skylar Thompson, so that's obviously going to put them behind the 8 ball here. And because Geno Smith has been playing really good football and that Seahawks team in general has looked solid at times, obviously they had a slow start in week 1 and they went to overtime with the Patriots, but I think they've looked relatively good. And because they're going up against a Miami Dolphins team that has a quarterback in Skylar Thompson, who I don't think is an NFL quality quarterback, I kind of think this should be a relatively easy win for Seattle. Miami is a good team that has some good pieces and they will be able to get pressure on Geno Smith. But when it comes down to it, if I'm taking Geno Smith or Skylar Thompson, I'm clearly going with Geno Smith. And I think that Seattle Seahawks team is bound for what should be a really good game. Then we have the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers are going with Andy Dalton, who I'm happy for. I'm happy that he's getting another opportunity, but I still don't think they're going to be all that good. The offensive line still has issues. The receiving core is very lackluster, and they don't have a run game to rely on. And because this is a Raiders team that can get pressure on opposing quarterbacks, can stuff the run, and has some pretty good secondary play, I do think they'll be able to do just enough to get a fairly easy win here. Now, I will say this, I think Carolina will play better with Andy Dalton, so I don't believe this is going to be a blowout per se, but I do think Las Vegas will be able to get the ball to their playmakers. They should be able to build some sort of decent run game, and I think ultimately they'll win this one, probably pulling away in the late 4th quarter. With that said, I think the final score will be 24 Las Vegas to 14 Carolina. Moving on to what should be a very important game for the rest of the season for both these teams in San Francisco versus the LA Rams. San Francisco's coming off a really bad loss to the Minnesota Vikings, whereas the LA Rams are kind of stumbling into their week 3 game after getting beat down by Arizona in week 2 and losing in overtime to Detroit. As of when I'm making this video, both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are likely not going to be playing in week 3, so they're going to be relying on their run game with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum and potentially some new receivers like Demarcus Robinson and Jordan Whittington. And that doesn't bode well for them when they're going into a matchup against, in my opinion, the second best team in the NFL in the San Francisco 49ers. Assuming the Niners play like how they typically do against the LA Rams, I think their offense should be totally fine. And barring Matthew Stafford turning back the clock and playing like he did in 2021, I just don't see how LA has a chance to win this one. You have a pissed off, talented San Francisco 49ers team going up against a talented but injured LA Rams team that really has no momentum going for them. So because of that, I do believe it will be close, but I don't think it's going to be a victory for LA. I do have San Francisco winning with a final score of 28-20. Moving on to another game in the 3 o'clock window between the Detroit Lions and the Arizona Cardinals. As I mentioned earlier, Arizona is coming off a very impressive blowout victory over the LA Rams, whereas this is a Lions team that is coming off of a loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, regarding that Buccaneers game for Detroit played fairly well offensively. It was just a couple plays here and there that really kind of hurt their game. They had a couple turnovers. Regardless, though, they had a couple turnovers and really weren't able to punch the ball in, whereas Tampa Bay was able to make the plays to win that game. But now they're heading into a game against an Arizona Cardinals team that looks like they're heading in the right direction. This one will not be easy for Detroit, but ultimately, this is sort of a must-win game for the Detroit Lions. Not because their season will be over and they're not going to be able to win a Super Bowl if they lose this game. That's obviously not the case here. But if you want to be able to win your division that's going to be very competitive between the Packers, the Vikings, and the Lions, then winning a game against a team that is not as good as you has to be a priority for them. Not to mention, if you want to get a bye week to start off your playoff run, you're probably going to need to win a game like this. Whereas for Arizona, there really hasn't been a bunch of expectations for you, so whenever you beat a team like the Rams and now you're heading into a matchup against Detroit, if you get blown out, nobody cares. But if you win, great. So this is a win-win situation for the Arizona Cardinals here. I don't think their talent does stack up with the Lions, especially for the Cardinals defensively, but I do believe that it will be a relatively close game for at least 3-ish quarters. But given all that, I'm going to pick the Lions to win this one with a final score of Detroit 31 to Arizona's 20. Then we have a potential game of the week between the Dallas Cowboys and the Baltimore Ravens. This one is going to be played in Jerry's World at the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. This game should be very interesting because both these teams are coming off really bad losses. For the Ravens, they lost to a bad team in the Las Vegas Raiders, whereas the Cowboys got absolutely mollywopped by the New Orleans Saints. And unfortunately for the Dallas Cowboys, this game is not going to be easy for them. They're going up against a really run-heavy offense that has an excellent defense, and that kind of does remind me a tad bit of New Orleans. Now, there are different styles of offense. Obviously, Derek Carr doesn't run the ball like Lamar Jackson, and obviously Derrick Henry is different than Alvin Kamara. So because of that, I don't necessarily believe this is going to be a game that ends in a blowout, but I can see this one being a game in which the first half is very competitive. Maybe it heads into halftime tied, but I do believe after the second half, this run game is really going to be able to put their foot down in Dallas's throat and ultimately give them a path to victory. I do believe that Dak Prescott will play well as he's done for most of the season thus far, but I don't think it's going to be enough. I think this Dallas defense has a lot of issues they have to overcome in order to win a matchup against Baltimore, which has a great defense, which has a great offense. So because of that, I'm going to give the victory to the Baltimore Ravens with a final score of 28-17. This is also one of those must-win games for the Ravens because they're right now 0-2. Then we have our Sunday night game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are coming off a very impressive victory against Philadelphia, but there's still a lot of question marks regarding this team and their offense. Whereas Kansas City has looked like Kansas City, I know Pacheco isn't going to be playing in this game, which is an issue, but I'm not too worried about it. All in all, the Falcons offense has looked good in spots. It's definitely shown flashes of what they can become, but it hasn't become consistent yet. Whereas this Chiefs team has looked like this exact team the last 3 to 4 years now. So because of that, I think this is a Falcons team that has a lot to overcome here. They're going to have to establish a dominant run game with Bijan, and Kirk Cousins is going to have to play at a high level to win this one. And even though I think that offense will be able to put up numbers, I still believe in Mahomes a whole heck of a lot more than I do in that Falcons offense. So because of that, I'm going to take the Chiefs to win this one with a final score of 27 Kansas City to 21 Atlanta. Then we have two Monday night games, a thing that I absolutely hate because it's hard to watch both games. But our first Monday game is between Jacksonville and Buffalo, a game in which both these teams need to win, but one clearly needs it a lot more. Jacksonville sort of has to win this game because if they lose, they're going to be 0-3, and you can basically throw out the season because 0-3 never leads to anything good. And they're not going to be given an easy one here. This is a Buffalo team that has looked very good thus far through the season, and I would venture to say that Josh Allen potentially might be the MVP right now. Still early, but I would say that he's probably earned my vote right now. So because of that, I really do feel that a team in Jacksonville that hasn't looked good is going to have to sort of put it all together this week against a very talented Buffalo team. Trevor Lawrence has looked good at spots, but it's been very inconsistent. The run game has been very bad. The offensive line has not looked good, and Trevor Lawrence has looked shaky at times. Whereas Buffalo, they've looked like Buffalo. They look dominant. They can run the ball. They can pass the ball. The defense looks good. It's not the best team in the NFL, but it's really not that far from a team like the Chiefs. So because of that, I'm going to go with Buffalo to win this one, and I think Jacksonville is going to be in a really big hole for the rest of the season. I have Buffalo winning with a final score of 31-21. And our last game of the week, again, Monday, is going to be between Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders going up against a desperate Cincinnati Bengals team. Now, this is a winnable game for Cincinnati. Obviously, Jaden Daniels and the Commanders offense hasn't quite been able to put it all together yet, but they've definitely shown flashes of their potential. Cincinnati looked much better in week 2 despite the loss to Kansas City, so I do believe that heading forward, that's going to be more of what we should expect from the Cincinnati Bengals offense. And in a game like this where it is a must-win situation, if that offense does not come out and show that they can play, that's going to cause them big-time issues moving forward. But I expect them to be able to do so. This is a Commanders defense that is really not good. They can't get pressure on quarterbacks, and their secondary is very shaky. So because of that, I do think the Bengals will be able to easily get probably over 24 to probably over like 25 points this game. And because I don't believe Jaden Daniels and Washington have quite yet gotten their rhythm in terms of scoring touchdowns, I'm going to give the victory to Cincinnati. I'm going to give the final score, the Bengals 31 to Washington's 18. But that is going to conclude all my picks. A bit of a summary here. These are all my picks right here. And if you agree or disagree with any of the picks, you can always let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so please go ahead and join us. And I love you guys. Peace.